This is Sandra Hart. It has taken me a long time to be able to be in the moment and to enjoy each day as it comes. It seems that throughout my life I have let my problems and outside interference overwhelm me so that I have traveled each day missing the joys of my life, those joys that were tucked in between the events in my world that were causing chaos. And therefore, while writing this memoir, I realize that there is much that I have lost. I have lost the small joys of past living that I can never retrieve because I was so consumed with the negative forces in my life. I let those forces control me. Growing up in Ohio, I constantly wished the days away, waiting to be well, waiting to graduate, waiting to leave. Later on, I was waiting to get discovered, waiting to get married, waiting to give birth, waiting for every dream. I wanted to be fulfilled. Then finally, I waited and hoped to survive. And while I waited, yesterday died, and tomorrow was not fully lived. I have finally learned to be aware of here and now, and to enjoy each moment of my day. But it has taken me a long time to reach this point in my life, a point where I can be grateful for each and every minute.
But your old man has yet to find.
Chapter 1, Houses. When I think back on my life, the memories that are filed away in that part of my mind seem to be directly related to the places I have lived and what happened within their rooms. Somehow I seem to remember more about those houses and what happened within them more than any detail than some other events in my life. Even today, where I live and my environment have a profound effect on how I feel. When I've been able to choose my surroundings, the places where I've been happy have been bright and the windows uncovered to let the light stream in. The other houses in my past that were dark, those I have lived in as a child or when others had control over my life, remain in my mind as representing a dismal place in my existence. I grew up in a steel town that long before my family arrived was given breath by the Industrial Revolution and had risen like the phoenix from the banks of the Ohio River Valley. These hillside homes looked to me like matchboxes stuck in uneven rows reaching down to the water's edge. Sometimes as I rode along in my father's old Model T, I would press my face against its window and look up and squint my eyes to blur the images. I imagined them to be hungry ravens on rocky cliffs, perched and ready to fly down and sweep me away under the darkness of their wings. I could easily imagine that darkness because shadows and smoke, the same lifeless color of the metal produced in the mills along the river, covered the houses on the inside and out with a darkness that never left. A darkness that, in spite of the prosperity from the mills, stayed with those that lived inside the houses too. The steel mill's vast furnaces devoured tons of coal around the clock and belched continuous white-hot fire from beneath the dripping vats of molten metal that once expelled, spewed like vomit into waiting troughs to cool. It was the thick, acrid smoke from the coal that was to be blamed for the constant shadows in which we lived, the gauze that draped Steubenville in monochromatic tones of gray. Even then, as a young child, I wished to escape to the sun of my grandfather's farm again. But for most of the grown-ups, the smoke and fire polluting the air could just as easily have been God spitting gold from the boughs of the chimney stacks as far as they were concerned. The country was hungry for steel, and there was work for everyone who was lucky enough to pass through the high, galvanized gates with a union card. It was 1948 and World War II was over, and the world was changing. Urban migration escalated, and Steubenville continued to grow. People were leaving the farms and the outlying areas of the valley to cash in on union wages and the good life the local mills provided. Our family was one of them. For Steubenville immigrants, mostly of European descent, the mills represented freedom and prosperity and their American dreams come true. For people like my father, American of English descent, and whose ancestors came ashore generations ago, it was steady work, a house to rent, new clothes, and long-needed visits to the dentist for their children. For all of them, it was a new beginning after the war. In our house on Saturday, the smell of pine and aroma hung heavily about our heads and made my nostrils sting as I helped my mother attempt to wash away from the windows and floor the dark, gritty covering that somehow got through our tightly sealed house. Useless work to dress these wooden boxes with rooms to live in, my mother would say. To me also, the job seemed endless and mostly hopeless as week in and week out we set about to erase the traces of the outside world that intruded into our lives and landed on our mother's fine belongings. I now know they were the only symbols of any dignity she perceived she had left since Daddy had taken work in the mill. I remember that yellow box of a house, its long front porch and the cement steps neatly cutting through the walled bank of sloping grass that led to the sidewalk below. The entryway with steps on the left climbing to 3 bedrooms and leading to the musty basement where the wringer washer ka-chugged, and long rope lines for the wash zigzagged across the length of the cement floor in our basement that never seemed to dry. The living room was right off the entry, and a curved archway invited visitors into another room made for dining originally, but used by us as a place we really escaped. All the chairs placed for ease of viewing and centered around our 19-inch RCA floor model television. Since the arrival of the magic black and white test-patterned world, a horizon beyond the life we knew in Steubenville came into our living room. The days of lingering in the kitchen listening to the Green Hornet and Dick Tracy on our tube radio after dinner were gone. In spite of Mother's sighs of yesterday's life and her dreams of something better someday, she was temporarily resigned to her fate and not the least impressed with our new RCA in the ugly square case and the blank face gazing out upon her good stuff. She lovingly decorated her pretend palace with her antiques and homemade drapes and ideas she copied from Good Housekeeping. I was just about 5 when we left Washington, so I have limited memories of my life there. But Mother said I had been delivered very quickly into her world, kicking and screaming on a cold Sunday night, exactly 1 week after the New Year. My best guess is that my homecoming was less than spectacular, since I was laid in a dresser drawer lined with a wool blanket and placed on the cherry wood bed in my parents' room. Why there was no bassinet waiting for my arrival, I was never told. My parents certainly were people who could afford better, but perhaps the presence of my father's strong-willed mother, who ruled the house, deemed that the need for such foolishness as a cradle or such nonsense was a waste, since a drawer would do just fine. My brother, who was 3 at the time, proclaimed with wonder that this new thing intruding into his life had eyes and a nose, and could we please give it away to Mariah, his nanny. I do remember my Aunt Mabel, Mother's older sister, with her heartfelt hugs, red nail polish, and smells of perfume. An afternoon with my aunt was always something so special. I remember her house was always very gloomy because it had awnings over the windows that restricted the daylight. Aunt Mabel was the only one of my grandparents' 10 children who wanted to be an actress. Grandpa, who had made money in the coal industry, was considered a rich man at the time, so he sent her to drama school. But before she could do much with her lessons, she fell in love with her dentist and got married and moved from Ohio to Washington, D.C., where he opened a new practice. Well, that kind of ended any aspiration she had for the theater. Her husband, Doc, drank, and then she started drinking right along with him. Whether it was from regret seeing her dreams evaporate, who knows? But she and Doc had 2 children that were grown up, and by the time I came along, she and Doc were alone with their scotch in their big, dark house. Oh, Aunt Mabel would let me dress up in her fox wrap that had the head and glass eyes attached. It had a clip under the fox's mouth that would grab onto his tail after she wrapped it around my shoulders. I had to hold my chin up high while she wrapped it around and around to keep it from falling off. Then Mabel would press me to her bosoms in a hug and lift me onto her dressing room table stool so that I could see myself in the mirror. "Oh, you look so lovely, miss," she said. "Where are you going tonight?" She made me feel so beautiful. Once I remember her painting my nails and my promising her that I wouldn't show them to Daddy. But I was so pleased with myself and thought they were so beautiful that when my father came to pick me up, what do you think I did? My first thing was to show them to my father. Well, Daddy's fury at her for daring to gild his innocent little Lily with her wicked red polish, the color of loose women, was not what I had expected. I was so afraid of him for being so mean to my aunt, and I was feeling so bad that she was angry with me for not doing what she had told me to do. So with me in tow, Daddy left in a huff. And I can't remember that I was ever allowed to go to visit Aunt Mabel all by myself again. I remember Sunday afternoons at double features with my family and dinner at the Lotus where grown-ups danced to live music. I remember roller skating with my brother and holding onto the high iron fence around our house to keep from falling. I remember the men in soldiers' clothes sitting in the lobby of the Willard Hotel and the runny, red-colored liver Mother bought at the corner butcher store to feed to the turtle at my brother's kindergarten. This was a school that seemed so far away across the dusty Circle Park with its tall trees and gray squirrels that circled our feet looking for a handout. I don't remember the Easter egg rolls on the White House lawn, but I know I went, or the cherry blossoms, or visiting the zoo. But I'll never forget the loneliness I felt when I heard the grown-ups talking about the tragic death of my Aunt Mabel from a fall down her basement stairs just before we moved to Ohio. She was my very first best friend, and I missed her hugs and fancy smells and red nail polish for a long, long time. Several years ago, I had the lead as Catherine the Great in an off-Broadway play. My costume came from the archives of the Metropolitan Opera and helped make it easier for me to be physically constructed and become the character I was portraying. The gown was of exquisite brocade with a fitted waist and a flowing back. Just imagining what famous diva may have worn the costume on the great stage of the Met before me, it increased the power of the grandness that made me feel Catherine's greatness. One night in the dressing room before my first performance, in costume and running my lines back at myself in the mirror just to warm up and take the edge off my nerves, the reflection I saw was quite curious. It was my Aunt Mabel looking back at me. Now, the only memento left to me of Aunt Mabel is a picture of her in theatrical costume. And now in my mirror, there she stood. I had never been aware of it before, but within the character of an older Queen Catherine, I had probably put a little bit of her and physically become my Aunt Mabel as she was in my photograph. I'd like to think that maybe, just maybe, her lusty spirit was there inside of Catherine, finally walking the boards she loved and left behind when she married Uncle Doc.
Our hearts you hold hostage, that much is clear. You are most welcome here.
Chapter 2. I was in bed celebrating my 13th birthday. I was confined for 6 months in the spring of that memorable year after suffering through several bouts of strep throat. At the top of the stairs, in the corner where my double bed angled squarely into the far recess of the space, and when house calls from the family doctor were expected, I was diagnosed with rheumatic fever. I was ordered to stay there until the illness had run its cycle. I should have thought it was fate worse than death, this pronouncement that I had to stay in bed for who knows how long, but at 12, I had no sense of time involved in recovery or caution about rheumatic fever and its possible serious side effects. The first weeks, I experienced an initial sense of drama, maybe even a little excitement about being sick. At least it was a way out of Saturday scrubbing. Well, whatever it was I was thinking, I knew it made me feel special or different in some way. But it didn't take a long time for the drama of being ill and the center of attention to begin to wear thin. Initially, the news of my illness captured my friends' imaginations, and they came around often and sat on my bed as we gossiped about the boys we had crushes on, but soon they quit coming around. Maybe they thought I would make them sick, but more than anything, it is probably just that it was so boring for them. After all, I really didn't have a life anymore that they could identify with now that I was bedridden. I soon began to feel the isolation from the active world I had known. I'd been a cheerleader, and the knowledge that the stigma of being sick and different and maybe even contagious brought on an overwhelming sense of loneliness and insecurity into my life. The pink penicillin liquid spoon to be by my mother was, well, not that good at all. I wanted to turn the clock back and start all over again. Please let me get well. I was sick and tired of being sick after about 2 weeks. Why should I be locked away in my bedroom prison while the rest of my friends were having a good time? Perhaps if I closed my eyes, I would just wake up and it would only be a dream. I wanted to close my eyes and make everything go away. But it didn't. Although Mother had come to accept her life in Steubenville, perhaps her earlier dreams of escaping her fate in our little house and the dreary life revolving around us subconsciously propelled me to dream of getting away someday. I thought about it constantly during the long months of my illness, the drama eventually losing out to the painful reality as the days droned on, one by one, month by month. But whatever the reason, maybe I was just born to fly. From the very beginning, I never felt that Steubenville was my home or that I really belonged there. I always felt a longing for another life somewhere, and I yearned of the day when I could escape the prison walls and the bleak, rocky cliffs represented to me. I longed to spread my wings and fly away, far away to the life that I saw on television and the movies. I had a fire burning within me that the confinement of my illness just fanned and no one else could extinguish. I had dreams to be fulfilled that I would not let die. In that respect, I was not my mother's daughter. I would accept nothing less than making my dreams a reality. I just had to. I just had to get better. Daddy. She and my father met in Doc's dental office, and they married before the war started, and she retired to assume what she thought her new role should be, caretaker of all that she loved. And that was her life and the way she lived it until the very end. She died at the age of 92, putting on lipstick for a visit with her children. Although my father was a constant in my life, his presence in my mind in those early years is woven through the eyes of my mother more than from the fabric of what I can remember. What stands out in my mind is that his prickly mustache, just like Clark Gable's, would tickle my cheek when he kissed me good night, and how warm and safe I felt as he held and sang to me to sleep. And that his voice, that seemed to come from a place so distant, made sleep come easily and peacefully. I thought he was so beautiful, just like my mother. Daddy always rose before dawn to go to the mill and was tired and went to bed early when he came home. When he worked the night shift, he came home too late for us to still be awake. On his days off, he would dress up and go downtown for the day. I hardly ever saw him. Maybe that's why my recall and his participation in my early life is so unclear. It was on Daddy's late nights when my brother and I would be sleeping that I do remember being awakened by the angry voices of my parents down in the kitchen, and my fear of the voices. But all the rest, if anything, I've shut out of my memories. With the exception of one night when I was maybe about 6 or 7. In the darkness, I was frightened at hearing my parents raise their voices to each other, and then I heard the front door open and slam closed. My brother got out of bed first, and I followed him to the window. I was too small to peek out over the window ledge into the darkness, even on my tiptoes, no matter how hard I strained. But my brother said he saw her mother walking away from the house. I was so afraid that she was leaving us and would never come back. I went to my bed and crawled under the cold covers, so scared that my body shook all night. I listened, and I listened a long time for the door to open, but it didn't. And sometimes during the night, my brother and I finally fell asleep. Mother was home by the time we awakened, and neither my brother nor I ever let on we heard anything. As I got older, my father used to say that I wore my heart on my sleeve. He never forgot to remind me that I was suffering from being too sensitive for this world. After I came back to school when I was over my illness, my friends sort of had gotten used to being without me, and it was as though I was a new girl in town all over again, and I had to earn a space within the group everyone wanted to be with. Some thought that rheumatic fever was catching, so they stayed away. And I had gained weight during my inactive bed experience, and I was wearing braces on my teeth when I went back to school. Believe me, I wasn't exactly Sandra D. And to make matters worse, I had to leave my classes early because I had to climb the stairs one at a time slowly and needed extra time to get from one class to the other. The humiliation of having to leave class knowing that the others would be running up the steps past me when the bell rang to get to the next class, while I was still plodding along, forced me to keep my eyes focused down only on the steps ahead of me. I found what satisfaction I could be had under the circumstances by building my high school life around academic achievements. It was this final isolation beyond my bedroom that drove me to bury myself further into my studies and plan even more fervently of leaving Steubenville for good. I couldn't wait to graduate, and as in my fantasies, fly away to a better place, a better life. And I was only 16.
Had you been watching and waiting from some place up above, somehow knowing in this place all these people